fall of last year, CCM has endeavored to act upon the report released by Dalio Education on Connecticut's unspoken crisis of at-risk and disconnected youth. Through expert roundtables, we learned that this is not just an urban problem or a rural problem, but one affecting all 169 towns and cities in Connecticut. It inspired us to create the 119K Commission, named after the number of youth who are at risk or disconnected, with the goal of reconnecting these young people with school or careers. We are inviting experts and the public to speak on this critical subject, and we want to share some of what they shared with us with you. To learn more, visit us at 119kcommission.org. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state and local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or our member municipal leaders. The Commission's first meeting was held in New Haven on... Our first meeting was held Tuesday, March 26th at New Haven's Hill House High School. This meeting focused on the question, who are the 119,000 at-risk or disconnected youths, and to discuss how the system operates.
So all of my, I think, major career information is on the slide. I was born and raised in New Haven, educated in New Haven public school system, went to Southern Connecticut State University, so I am a true New Havenite at heart. And I taught in New Haven public schools after graduating. The first and only school that I would teach in is Riverside Education Academy, which 20 years ago would have been identified as an alternative education. At that time, students who needed more support, wraparound services, and that wasn't offered in a comprehensive high school would attend Riverside for a smaller environment, a more individualized plan, and not necessarily special ed or 504, but a smaller community that knew the student and could build a program that will allow for them to be successful. The type of student that would attend Riverside at that time is different from the 119,000 we are talking about today. The profile of the student has changed over the last 20 years, and some of that has been accelerated by COVID, but also some of the influx of new immigrants we are seeing in Connecticut. So today, if I can capture my experience in one quote, I want to tell you this story, and I know most speakers, when they want to make an impression on people, a lasting impression, they tell a story. So this quote, and one day, I would go from feeling on top of the world to feeling the weight of the world. And this is recently, less than a month ago, I had a freshman student who is a 17-year-old freshman, newly immigrated to this country, and who has to work for survival, has to work to pay the person he lives with, pay rent, and send money back to his family. And he was attending school up until maybe 2 weeks ago and just disappeared, just dropped off the face of the earth. And we were looking for him. We would call him, and we eventually found him. He didn't know the name of the place he was working in, but he would tell me the neighborhood and the type of restaurant it was. Myself and a truancy interventionist would go searching the neighborhood for this young man, asking people in the front at the register, do you know him? Have you seen him? Getting no's, asking for suggestions on where to find this restaurant. We knew we were in the location. So when I found him, I texted my team back at the building. I was like, oh my goodness, I found my student. I am so excited. I felt like I had just won the lottery. But listening to his story about why he was sent here, the obligations he had back at home, and why he couldn't return to school, I felt like I didn't have the resources to re-engage him. He needed a program that would allow him to still support himself and his family, but to also earn his high school diploma, which led me to reach out to a team of almost 6 people to come up with a plan. And we were able to do something that was unorthodox, that was new, that is a pilot, but it's just an example. That's one story. I service almost 500 ninth graders on a daily basis. So we talk about who these kids are, right? How do we identify the neediest students that come into our systems? I'm fortunate to be in a position where I collaborate with the RISE network, and I have at my fingertips data systems that identify students based on the risk of them becoming disengaged, but where the opportunity lies. So there's one thing to look at, the opportunities or the risk of students becoming disengaged. But when you know where to look for opportunities to keep them engaged, it's very powerful. So these are the data markers we look for when we have incoming ninth graders into our system. They're usually more than 10% absent from the year, which means they're chronically absent, less than 90% present. They have failed more than one class. And also they have experienced multiple discipline issues. We just heard Josh talk about being expelled or suspended so much that they're not in the classroom, and oftentimes they don't feel welcome in the building. So these are students with this type of history, and when they have 2 or more of these indicators, I know coming into my building, this is someone that will need extra support. This type of data is not always offered. It wasn't something that I had as a teacher 20 years ago, but I will tell you, the principal I served under, she would meet with every single family one-on-one and get every single family story and every student story, and she knew what they would need coming into her building at Riverside. So there needs to be some type of intake system that allows you to know what risk, where will the student fall or become disengaged, and where can you provide them support to keep them engaged. Our neediest students, like I said, has shifted, right, over the last 20 years. We see with COVID and also with access to social media. Now, I may be dating myself, but there was a time where Facebook was only for adults. I don't know if you remember that. You had to have a college account or be older to have Facebook. These students have access to social media younger and younger, right, at younger ages, and they are comparing themselves to other students. They are being bullied online. So we see an increase in mental health, anxiety, depression, and we're not talking about our students have been exposed to trauma in their neighborhoods, right? So we have these students who are needy. We also have families in need. You know, food is skyrocketing, housing is skyrocketing, and our families have financial constraints, and that weighs on our students. And then you have an influx of students with, language barriers, cultural barriers. They don't know the educational system here in the States, and they are the ones we are seeing the profile of our neediest students coming into school. So what does this look like? Typically, our tier 3 interventions usually went to our students with IEPs who were special ed. But we are finding that our students who are becoming disengaged or at risk, they need a specialized plan to re-engage them. It's requiring a number of practitioners. I find myself around the table with teachers, counselors, mental health professionals, nonprofit to help us fund resources that we may not have in our school budget. I need city and school representatives at the table in order to provide resources that may be at the city level, that may not be at the school level. The young man I spoke about earlier, we need more alternative opportunities. We learned through COVID how to live in a virtual world. We have tools at our fingertips, but we need the resources to develop hybrid learning programs, possibilities for apprenticeship for students to learn core classes and then eventually accrue credits in some type of field, or maybe even earn income in an internship, because more and more we are seeing our young people contributing to the household to help their families make ends meet. Night schools for teen parents, or again, students who are working. What can we offer to make education realistic for these students who need it the most? And lastly, I talked about resources and partnerships. We know that many of these things require funding, right? The tools, funding the people, funding the programs, funding the partnerships. And what that looks like, we have a food pantry, right, that we feed families and students from. We give them coats in the winter, clothing banks. You will hear about housing here, but I have students who need support. I have an 18-year-old who is working to pay his rent with a roommate. So we need to help him with housing. And I have a young ninth grader who is looking to re-engage in school, and her childcare fell through. And it took 4 of us to get her childcare so that she can return to the building. So with all of that information, right, that comes with data. And data is a word that we used to run away from. But I would tell you, anybody who works on my team knows I'm all about my data. And data is only as valuable as the person who is looking for it through it with the lens and the purpose and the action steps, right? So if we're looking at these circles, we hope that the data systems that we can offer will allow us to make education more equitable for the students who need it most. So you have global data that lets us know the demographics coming in and out of our building. We have classroom data. Where are students receiving the most failures? Is it something that the teacher needs more support with? Are pass rates different in some courses than others? Where do we need to fill the gaps there? Student specific, if it's an individual student, their attendance, their grades, discipline, and then gaps that are exposed through assessments. Data, I say, is like, I don't know if you prefer Walmart or Target, but sometimes when you don't go in there with a list, your cart is overflowing. But when you go and look at data using systems, you know exactly what you're looking for. You can change a student's life. So some of the data systems that have worked in my experience have been, I've talked about the RISE network and their data dashboard. I'm able to drill in and look at the student's report card, their attendance record, what teachers they have. Power School, logs and reports that speaks to the system on RISE data dashboard. And then believe it or not, opportunities for teacher teams, that's a system that gathers data. And what I mean by that is the most disengaged students are teamed with 4 teachers, 4 core teachers. Those teachers meet every other day to speak about this student. How can they engage the student? What kind of supports do they need? They're communicating consistently with the parents. We are collecting qualitative data through meeting agendas and support plans, interventions, and then reassessing our interventions. It sounds like a PPT meeting, but it is for students who need to be re-engaged or are at risk of being disengaged. And then you have, this can lead to referrals to IEPs and 504s if needed. But these are the interventions we are putting in place to make sure, but we need data systems. And it does take resources. And the most promising for me so far that I've used has been the RISE data dashboard. And just looking at, so now we've talked about all the things like the holes, right? But what are some of the things that can help fill the gaps or solutions, preventative solutions? We know that transitions are difficult for all kids. Change is difficult. So transition programs have been preventative in my experience. And I've had it as a teacher at the alternative school where students have been able to come in the summer and get used to the building, but also in my experience now as an administrator. So grade 9, I've been on both sides of the coin. Grade 9, we do a summer transition program where students have access to the pathways and curriculum. It's not something academic, it's more enrichment, right? They get it introduced so that they are not as anxious about that transition to high school. We staff that program with teachers from the building. We have a dean of students. We give them exposure to sports or other programs and clubs. We have them participate in a skills class where they learn about advocacy skills and study habits and conflict resolution. We build them up before they get into the high school experience. The other would be through 11th and 12th grade. Those years are very important. So we do a college boot camp. And that college boot camp allows students to learn about FAFSA. They choose colleges within their GPA. They learn about a GPA and what qualifies them for certain colleges they choose or try to choose a major. So their search is focused and they have a plan. Their parents receive a checklist. So they go into 12th grade having a plan on how they want to move forward. But there's a backside to that. We heard about students who aren't, after they graduate high school, they don't have a job, or maybe they don't complete the process of college. There needs to be a follow-up to students who graduate. We do a program called Summer Melt Campaign. Summer melt, ice melts in the summer. Kids are so excited about going into college and then challenges come up. How am I gonna pay for this? How am I gonna get to the school? I have some paperwork that's outstanding, like my transcripts. There's one individual who follows up with that student and makes sure that they close all the loopholes and make that transition into college. So 11th and 12th grade transitions are really important as well. One thing I created when I was in charge of 12th grade was called a task force. We keep talking about these teams. Teams are very important to serving this demographic of student. So my team would have caseloads of students. We would get them funding for education, and we would make sure if they didn't have access to FAFSA, they had access to other funding. And there was one person responsible for following up with that family or that student. And it was a way for them to build a relationship. Paying for college is very personal. You have to share your financial information. So we created a team where each family, each student had a trusted adult to help them with that post-secondary planning. And every student, we make a goal of 100% of students will graduate with a plan, whether that's working, whether that's going to a school. And again, I referenced the dashboard. The data dashboard holds those plans for people on that team, the counselor, the administrator, the family to reference. And I really would say, in all the years I've been in education, interdisciplinary teams have been essential to providing support and being proactive to students. We share things that work. Maybe that student has a rapport with one other person, and that person can be the one to re-engage that student. So having wraparound services and an interdisciplinary team to support that student is really important. So that concludes my slides, and I'm available for questions.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. Our second meeting took place on Tuesday, April 30th at Mansfield Town Hall. This discussion focused on poverty, homelessness, and housing insecurity.
Can you hear me okay? All right. Well, thank you to all of you who have come out tonight to hear from us. Thank you to everyone in the room for being here, and to those online. We are eager to share. Got it. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So we are eager to talk with you all about homelessness and poverty, and we will jump right in. We thought the first thing we'll do is a little bit of level setting, give you a little bit of data, but not too much, just so that everybody has a sense of the scope of what we're talking about here. So we wanted to start with school district data. I'm not sure if you're all familiar, but all of this data is available right on the State Department of Education's Ed site. So you could look up your own individual districts if you haven't already. We always encourage people to be doing that and engaging with homeless providers in their community about the numbers, because the numbers are only as good as what is tracked and reported. But to give us just a starting point, for the 2022-23 school year, there were about 5,000 students experiencing homelessness. And so this includes students who are on their own, which we'll talk about in a moment. This includes students with families. This includes students in shelters. This includes students on couches, all of those categories. Particularly concerning is the 82% of students experiencing homelessness are students of color. So make no mistake, we're talking about a race equity issue. The primary nighttime residence for most students experiencing homelessness is doubled up, which means that they are on couches, on the floor, on pull-out beds, crowded rooms, basically doubled up with somebody else because of their loss of housing. That's the biggest category in Connecticut of students experiencing homelessness. And then we have students who have learning challenges, whether that's because they have a disability or they're English language learners or multilingual learners, also experiencing homelessness. So we have those categories at 28% of students experiencing homelessness having disabilities and 22% who are English language learners. This last category is a particular passion of ours. This number of unaccompanied youth. Under the federal law, that means students who have been separated from their parent or guardian. Their parent or guardian may also be experiencing homelessness, and maybe some of the family is staying in one place and this student has been separated. It could also mean, and we've had plenty of these scenarios, where the student is not in touch with their family at all. Their family may be in the state, their family may not be in the state. And this particular number is the biggest area where we see an undercount. And what young people tell us is they don't want to tell anybody that this is their situation. They have fear of child protection services. They may have siblings who are still with their parents and they don't want to get the rest of the family in trouble. They may have shame, and they also don't know their legal protections to stay in school. And so we have some recommendations around that we'll talk about. But this number is really concerning to us in the fact that we believe it to be a really big undercount. So the last time that Connecticut as a state did a particular count for youth experiencing homelessness was in 2020, pre-pandemic. The findings came out just after the pandemic started. The count was done in January, so this is completely pre-pandemic. But this statistic that we show you here of about almost 700 minors 17 and under experienced literal homelessness in 2020. Literal homelessness being in a car, on the street, in an abandoned building, literally no place to be. Almost 700 in 1 year, estimated. That's shocking to us. That's a shocking number that we should all be concerned about. This data that we're showing you here, also from the 2020 youth count, really just gives you a broader look at the population. Almost 8,000 young people who were on their own experiencing either unstable housing or literal homelessness. And so you can see the 18 to 24-year-old population, and you can see the population of minors in these numbers here. And we think that those are important distinctions. The systems for the 18 and over population are very different than the systems for minors or lack thereof. And distinguishing the remedies and the experiences of those two populations is important. So when we talk about homeless youth or young adults, we want to make that distinction between those populations. And so I think the last thing we want to underscore is something that Andrew Ferguson said earlier, just the strong connection between homelessness and disconnection, and that it's an important subset of the population. So we appreciate you taking these comments and thoughts on homelessness from us.
Thank you, Stacy, for doing some of that level setting for us. So, as Andrew mentioned, we're going to be talking for about 20, 30 minutes, and then there'll be some Q&A as part of that. And so, before we really jump into talking about all the issues and recommendations we have as a group, we wanted to talk about two important or overarching values that we have as a group, as people who work in housing, who work with disconnected youth in general. And one of them, as Mayor Carbone mentioned, was working and really partnering with young people with lived expertise. Having these conversations with these young people, making sure that they are part of not only creating the solutions, but also implementing the solutions. As part of all of our organizations, we have either worked with young people, done research with young people, have employed young people with expertise to conduct research, to be a part of these conversations. We have young people as part of our committees. We have young people employed at all of our organizations who all have lived expertise. And as Carbone mentioned, we really believe that to find the correct solutions, to find the best avenues to reconnecting these youth to the resources that they need, we have to continue to listen to young people with expertise, continue to partner, pay them to do this work, or just and let them lead the work as well. And so, in many ways, we have been able to foster that in our different spaces. The other overarching value that we have is just race equity in general. We want to make sure that we include that in every piece of the conversation. We are going to be talking about a lot of different systemic issues, a lot of issues that are really important to us, a lot of issues that are, a lot of young people are facing, and we want to make sure everyone is thinking about that in a race equity lens, thinking about Black, Indigenous people of color, thinking about people of different sexual orientations and gender identities, and so many more marginalized communities that are impacted in compounding ways through a lot of the issues that we're going to mention. And one of the things that we consistently do is look at data, looking at entries and exits for people of different identities, and seeing, how are young people specifically of different identities, how often are they coming into the system, how often are they receiving the services that they need, and how often are they leaving the system without receiving what they need. And so those are two major things we want to make sure is still in everyone's mind. Like, all the work that we do is through a race equity lens. All of it is working with young people with expertise. So on that note, one of the first big topics, as you can see on the screen, is improving data. And so Stacy did already give us a really good introduction to what data is available in the state. And I wanted to ask Stacy if she could mention a little bit more about what are the current gaps and needs for more accurate data, more information. We already saw a lot of really scary, daunting facts on that screen, but what don't we know? What else should we be looking at?
Thank you, Angel. So one of the two recommendations we have around data, one is that the youth count data that I spoke about earlier, as I mentioned, is from 2020. We need to redo that. We need to see where we are. We've all been through COVID. It's been 4 years. We need to see where we are. The state does do an annual point-in-time count of homelessness. However, I think we could all agree that youth homelessness looks different than other forms of homelessness. And you saw that number of the number of folks who are doubled up. And so really getting at that number and what it looks like, what we can say about race and ethnicity, what we can say about young people's in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity who are experiencing homelessness in our state. We need to redo that data. The second thing that we would say is around school identification of students experiencing homelessness. We think that it is can be attacked on multiple fronts. Number one, training, training, school staff at all levels, at the front desk, in the classroom, in the central office, in the phys ed teachers, in the coaches. Those are the people that students are likely to talk to. Those are the people, if they understand the signs and symptoms of homelessness, and if they understand the legal rights of students experiencing homelessness, they could help to stave off some of that moving around and students not wanting to talk about their experiences. I can't tell you how many football coaches will contact me and say, I got this kid, he keeps not being able to come to practice because he's moving around so much. I only know because I keep asking him why he's not at practice. And so at all levels of the school experience, the more that people know that students get to stay in their school while they're moving around, that students can get the transportation, that they're not going to be kicked out of school because now they're staying in another town. And last week they were staying in a different town. So we really think that training is critical. And then for students and families, the more that they understand their rights, the more that they're sharing it with their friends and with people they know. And so we're going to talk a little bit later about a particular pilot, but student ambassadors, really important. That's who young people listen to more than me, more than any of us. They listen to their peers. And the State Department of Ed, if you're not already familiar, had a whole campaign called No Matter What. And all of those materials are available online. They can be used in schools, but the message is to students. No matter what, no matter where you are, you could be in school. And so those materials are available and helpful for spreading some of the word.
Thank you, Stacy. And I definitely want to mention too, all the conversations I've had with young people who, there are so many great services that you just mentioned that are out there that young people are still being missed by the mark and falling through those cracks. Like myself at a very young age of 16 years old, not knowing about McKinney Vento liaisons and doing the research through the Youth Action Hub. Like there are so many folks who are experiencing housing instability in their teenage years in high school who don't know these McKinney Vento liaisons exist, don't know their rights, and we've done so much work to create these solutions. So we need to make sure we're pushing and having the resources to make sure everyone knows about these resources so that young people aren't falling through these cracks. I know another thing we really want to talk about is how system improvement is critical. And when we think about systems, we're talking things about mental health, we're talking about income, affordable housing, childcare, discrimination, and all these barriers are compounding and how persistent they are. And two of the big things we think is really important to talk about today is access and transportation. And when it comes particularly to access, we have we have a such a robust like housing system that does so many things well, and unfortunately one of the biggest barriers is that we have a single front door to the system as a whole, which is our 211 system of calling and getting your can appointment to essentially get any type of housing resource. And so we're constantly having the conversation of how what better ways are there to access, because people are having either negative experiences through different things or through 211 and are refusing to use the front door of the system and are essentially just not even being seen by our system, because if they're not excuse me counted in our system, if they're not accessing services, we don't even know that they exist. And so I know one of the solutions that we talk about when we talk about access is like meeting young people where they're at and finding different ways, including innovative ways to really reach people. And so one of the things I want to talk about that Stacy and I really are very passionate about is the virtual drop-in center idea. And this is a model that is something that is a pilot study at the Youth Action Hub and can be completely done in different ways. And so we don't have anything to show whether this idea how it could work, but we do have conversations and information from young people that we've done studies with to talk about a one-stop shop that has everything a young person needs, a place where they can go not only to hang out and talk to other peers, but also to talk to providers, talk to mental health experts, talk to just basically anyone in their potential areas, whether that's locally or statewide. And so the virtual drop-in center is not only a space for people to find resources and either like whatever's on 211, whatever's on other places from a virtual space. It's also a place where young people are the experts to what resources are current, what are actually working. And, we hear a lot of the times, and one of the issues with access is, we give referrals out to young people. And when they call that place, when they go to that place in person, it's either closed or the hours are different or they haven't been providing that service for X amount of years because there's no longer any funding for it. And so we know that young people are really the experts into what's currently exists because they're using it, they're finding it, they're doing it. And so creating spaces where young people can have access to providers, but also to their own peers to see what's currently working. But also, we talk about often at the Youth Action Hub of using this as a radical self-care model where mental health is a really important piece to all of this, where everyone wants a space where they can come as their whole self. When you go to a physical drop-in center, you're going there with the knowledge that everyone who sees you going into that drop-in center, there's a stigma. You're either experiencing housing instability or you're experiencing something else. Like, there is this weird feeling of going and using these spaces. And so with a virtual space, you kind of are usually safer from those stigmas from people seeing you there. And so along with that as well, we're talking about coming in as the whole health, as your whole self. Like, there are things that people go in there for to just have conversations with their peers, have conversations with providers. Really, all of the things that you do when you go into a physical drop-in center, you talk to people, you have conversations. It's something that everyone needs. And so, I won't go on forever about that, but that is one of the solutions that we are talking about is finding other access points, whether it's a virtual drop-in center, whether it's some other form of virtual means where someone can come in and get all of the services they need in one spot and talk to peers of their age and find out what's working for them. That's one thing we're thinking about. And then I'm gonna ask Stacy to talk a little bit about the minor community care teams. Pass this on to you.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. Our third public meeting took place on Wednesday, May 29th at Trumbull Town Hall. The topic of discussion for this event was child welfare and the justice system involvement.
First and foremost, I want to thank all the commissioners. I want to thank you for the invitation to be here tonight. The work that you all are doing is nothing short of extraordinary. It matters. And I want to thank the chiefs and the other panelists as well. Just sitting in the audience and sitting here on this panel and listening and hearing about the work and about the ideas and some of the paradigm shifts that are being suggested is inspiring, is very inspiring. I was inspired today on my ride up here, up the Merritt Parkway. 30 years ago, I served as a correction officer for the Bridgeport Correctional Facility. And one of the most memorable moments for me was working the youth full offender unit at the Bridgeport Jail. As a young black man in my 20s at the time, the majority, not all, but the majority of those youthful offenders within that unit looked like me when I was their age. But for a strong family home, a good environment, and a positive attitude most of the time, that could have been me. So I decided 30 years ago that I could do more on the outside versus what I was doing on the inside. And this is not a knock to DOC, but I just did not find that there was any correcting going on in the Department of Corrections. So here we are today. I am inspired, though. I am inspired because, we're talking about things that really, really mattered. I just listening to our state's attorney earlier when she talked about the idea of hub and spoke, which I fully support. But as a policing leader, I think about prevention also. So I would argue that we need to consider that hub and spoke idea on the front end, and I'll get a little into that as we go on. But I also am inspired by what I'm hearing from Chief Glenn. Every young person, every young person should be handled with care. So congratulations, chiefs, on the work that you're doing. Law enforcement has a unique role to play in disrupting our present status quo that leaves 119 disconnected young people in the state of Connecticut, at least 12,000 severely disconnected, unemployed with no high school diploma, or who are incarcerated. This is a state that we know has 90,000 unfilled jobs. We have programs that work in place. For example, you've heard about the police activities leagues in cities like Waterbury, Bridgeport, Hartford, and New Haven that offer the opportunity to expand and build upon successful programs engaging young people. And those aren't the only programs. There are other programs that don't get the same notoriety, but are doing a yeoman's work in our communities. A key recommendation from the Boston Consulting Group, after reading and digesting that information in that report, was to significantly strengthen the capacity of organizations already serving at-risk and disconnected young people. At the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, we are already one of those organizations that have the capacity, and we have that capacity through our Fire Commission, Emergency Management, and Emergency Telecommunications. And I may offer our division, we were talking about DNA earlier, our Division of Scientific Services. Crime rates and the number of Connecticut young people involved with the justice systems has declined, but the proportion of young people involved with the justice system are often repeat offenders. The work that you're doing, the work that we're doing in understanding the data can help us understand how the justice system impacts disconnection, education, and labor market outcomes. Here's some findings. I asked my staff to do some analysis of DOC data and National Incident-Based Reporting System data. And here's what I found. Each year from age 15 to 24, the percent of incarceration increases. Connecticut youth are being incarcerated for serious criminal offenses toward other people, and these incarcerations have increased in recent years. There may be a relationship between these crimes specifically and disconnection. Connecticut youth are being incarcerated for acts outside the typical bounds of social behavior and morality. And these incarcerations have increased in recent years. There may be a relationship between these crimes and specifically this connection. Although the number of youth arrested is decreasing, more work can and should be done, as I said earlier, to prevent arrest and incarceration in order to reduce crime and the potential for disconnection. These chiefs and most chiefs know that the success, or better yet, the measure of a good police department isn't how quickly you respond to a crime. It is by how much crime you prevent. If we take that same mantra and apply that to how we're treating our young people, our disconnected youth in our communities, we may be onto something. As the commissioner, there are 4 areas that I will ask you tonight that I would love to have increased involvement in. First and foremost, I believe we should be scaling our efforts to identify and support young people at risk of justice involvement or violence. We heard from other panelists that there's, I think it was said by our state's attorney, that either someone owns it or no one owns it. I would ask us to think a little bit deeper on that and challenge ourselves to ask, what's the work and who does that work? What are the core competencies for the individuals who are doing that work? I love our police officers. I've been a police officer for a long time. But I also believe that there are some people out there with the skill sets, the background, and experience to bring to bear to work with our young people. Let's explore that. I also believe we should explore opportunities to continue making evidence-based the evidence-based case for alternatives to justice system involvement. We've done an amazing job in the state of Connecticut. We've come a long way. I heard some talk earlier about how much it costs to incarcerate a young person in the state of Connecticut. I believe it's $270,000. Okay, so there was some listening, some learning, and then the state led on that. But success is never final. We need to, in my opinion, benchmark with other jurisdictions that are doing similar work. Learn, bring back those best, most promising and emerging practices here to the state of Connecticut. We have the capacity, the bandwidth, the brains, and the will to do that work. We must evaluate the most critical supports for reentry for young people to mitigate recidivism. Those of us who have been in this work know that there are three criminogenic factors that are evident throughout that can tell whether or not someone's going to reenter. That is attitude, environment, and dysfunctional home. We know that. I'm going to go back to the hub and spoke on the front end. Lastly, I also believe it is important, and this is coming from a police chief, and continue to investigate the impact of the adult justice system reform. There is a significant population of Connecticut residents ages 14 to 26 that are at risk for not graduating high school or graduating high school with a diploma or equivalent but not employed, or in post-secondary education, not graduating in high school and not employed or incarcerated and severely disconnected. The bottom line is the potential economic burden that this pattern places on our state, if not addressed, is significant. In closing, I just want to say I thank you for the opportunity just to share some remarks with you, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
We'd like to thank our commission members, our panelists, and the members of the public who have given testimony. You can RSVP for our next meeting on June 25th at Meriden Town Hall by visiting our website at 119kcommission.org. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.